Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Tami, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here this morning. I'm grateful to be anywhere this morning sober, that's for sure, because it wasn't always the case. I'm in California right now, so it's morning. I want to apologize, especially to you, Glenn. I know what it's like to run a meeting and not have your speaker show up. When I went to log on, all of a sudden Zoom said that I couldn't log on until I updated all these drivers. So I was spending the last 25 minutes updating a driver. And I was just on Zoom last night. I'm a teacher and I teach remotely from home. So that was a surprise to me. So I apologize to you as well. But God is always in charge. I remember one time I was supposed to speak at a meeting and it was pouring with rain and a friend was driving me. And this is the good news about Alcoholics Anonymous. I get there and it's like 500 people. The meetings are big here in LA and or in California, and the meeting had already started and everybody was seated. And I just walked in quietly and sat at the back. And right before they announced the speaker, they just said, "Did Tami ever make it?" And I just quietly put up my finger and they just walked me up and I gave my talk. But the good news is that every person in that meeting has a story of what it was like, what happened, and what we are like today. And anybody could have done that. So the lesson is that Alcoholics Anonymous does not need me, but I need Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're just part of a great thing. So Chris, hopefully I'll hear your story coming down the pipe, but thank you for being willing to step in. I'm just going to get right into my story. First of all, I want to thank our birthday friend with 4 years of sobriety. That's a big deal. Next year, you'll be a handful. And if you do not drink, and people always say, God willing, and I always say, Tami willing. God is always willing for me to be sober, but Tami has to be willing to do what I need to do. I believe that God gave us Alcoholics Anonymous as a gift, and we get to use our free will as to whether we access that or not. Anyway, my sobriety date is April 24th, 1993, so I celebrated 30 years this past April, which was a miracle in my mind because I was like the least likely to succeed when I came into AA. My home group is the Geyserville Thursday night speaker meeting. I am a firm believer meeting makers make it. If I'm not at a meeting, there's a darn good reason why. I was brought up and kept in good stead. And there's many times my mind wasn't trained, but my feet have always been trained to make meetings, and I've done that regularly for 30 years. I say this not to name drop, but to pay respect to the man that sponsored me for 16 years of my sobriety. But for those of you who have heard of him, Clancy was my sponsor until he passed away 3 years ago. And today I have a sponsor, Pat Y. So I have a home group, I have a sponsor, I go to meetings regularly, and I have a sobriety date. Many things in my 30 years of sobriety have changed. I lost a mom, lost friends. I've gotten married. I got divorced, just retired from a 26-year career. There's all kinds of ups and downs. Had a very, very sick son. Currently, for those of you who know me, my current husband has stage 4 cancer, and he's battling that. So I have learned in Alcoholics Anonymous that many things will go up and down, but the one thing that must remain consistent and constant is my sobriety date. I'm described in this book right here, Alcoholics Anonymous, as an alcoholic that is never mildly intoxicated. I'm always more or less insanely drunk. So I'm either sober or drunk. I'm also described in AA vernacular. It's not described in the book, so I can only tell you my experience with it, but I'm referred to in AA vernacular as a blackout drinker. And my experience with that is when I drank beverage alcohol, I would go into lapses of memory where I will do strange and incredible things that I would be mortified to do in a sober state of mind, only to feel that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization they talk about in this book the next day when people would tell me what I'd done the night before. But I didn't understand any of that because I didn't know what an alcoholic was. As a kid, up until 9 years old, I had a mom, a dad, a sister, and a family, and life seemed okay. At 9 years old, my parents went through a divorce, and the only reason I bring that up is it's the first time looking back after reading the book Alcoholics Anonymous that I started to demonstrate that tremendous selfish, self-centered fear that everything was cycling around me, and for some reason I had to control it. My parents were the first to get a divorce in our local town. This was in the 60s. It was like 1968. And at that point, nobody in our town had gotten a divorce. And I remember feeling extremely humiliated. Both my parents were professional athletes, and they owned a local ice skating rink where every single kid in my school took lessons from my parents. So, and my dad was president of the Chamber of Commerce. So I just felt like everybody was looking at us. It was due to an infidelity, which was extra embarrassing. And it seemed, in my opinion, that everybody knew and everybody cared. And my way to control that at 9 years old was that I decided I was going to become the bow on the package of our ugly family. We ended up, my dad foreclosed the house on us, and my mom, my sister, and I had to move to another location. And right across the street from where we had moved, there was this huge sports tennis complex that was had just been built. And back then in Los Angeles, this was like when tennis was in its heyday. In fact, across the world, everything was tennis. And so they had this big 16-court complex, and they put this very famous retired tennis pro in charge of this complex. And it had a whole bunch of like celebrity games. A lot of things were televised there. It had a huge center court. And at 9 years old, there was so much acrimony in my parents' divorce. I would just kind of go to school, change my clothes, and every day at 9 years old, go across the street to this tennis complex. And I used to watch Wimbledon on TV as a kid, and I'd see the ball girls and the ball boys dressed in all white, running back and forth, getting the balls, throwing it to the players. And somehow at 9, I just decided to make myself the self-appointed ball girl. So I would go over there on the weekends when they had these celebrity matches, and I'd put on my whites, and I was the ball girl. And after the players would tip me coins, and I'd come home with a little money in my pocket. I believe my first addiction was probably reading. There was a lot of infidelity and anger and some violence in my home growing up. And so I used to just kind of lose myself in books. And to this day, many people who know me know that I'm at my happiest when I'm, curled up with a good book. And I used to be able to escape to faraway lands and happy families in books. So it's no wonder that I later went on to become a high school English teacher. I just retired last year from 26 years of teaching English. And so I was kind of this gooky kid where I really wasn't a kid. I was always either reading or over at this tennis complex. Anyway, after all, every day this guy would be done teaching lessons or doing all the things that went on in the center. I would help him clean up and put things away. And he knew I was a troubled kid. And he had this ball machine, and one day I picked up a racket and just started hitting the balls on this machine, and he saw I had a propensity for hand-eye racket sports. So he kind of took me under his wing, and every evening he would give me a 15 to a half-hour lesson. Well, that resulted in, by the time I was 12 years old, I was actually ranked in the state of California as a tennis player. I was starting to play tournaments and traveling further out than just my local city. During this time in my parents' divorce, I used to have to go spend the weekends with my dad. Our stories disclose in a general way here in Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'm not going to go into any type of graphic detail other than to say that if you were a girl and you had a budding teenage body, you started to become very unsafe with my dad when you're alone with him on the weekends. Because I was the bow on the package kid that tried to make everything okay and make our family look good, I kept that a secret. My mom was trying to work 2 jobs to, support us. My dad, she kept having to go to court to get child support. He wouldn't give it to her. It was a rough time for my mom. And so I just decided, I'm going to do whatever my dad wants to do and keep it a secret. I didn't want my family to look any uglier than it already did. And I certainly didn't want to stress my mom out. So again, me always trying to control things in my little perception of reality. This progressed and things got worse as somehow I came up, and the book tells us we're selfish, we're self-centered, we're grandiose, we're childlike, we're restless, we're irritable, and we're discontent. Yay us, every illness has some type of symptoms. For us, that's the symptoms of alcoholism, or certainly untreated alcoholism. And I had these little childlike ideas, and the book tells us, that we're childlike in our thinking. And my childhood idea was that I was going to become this famous tennis pro, and I was going to make a boatload of money, and I was going to support my sister, myself, and my mom in the style that we deserved so that we could finally get away from my dad. And I became obsessed with this to the point where I would train for hours every day. I'd go to school. I couldn't get a B. I had to get an A. I would study. It was like relentless. I was very controlled. During this time, there was like good girl Tami and bad girl Tami. And good girl Tami was the one that studied and won awards and just was the bow on the package. But every month or two, I would have these outbreaks where I'd have these temper tantrums of rage and start tearing down my room and running away from home. And they would always only last a day or two. It was like a snap thing. And I later found out it had a lot to do with the abuse going on at home, and I wasn't in control of my body. So I would, act out. And I started to have this bad girl Tami, and I was always so afraid that she would show up, because when it would happen, I didn't have a whole lot of control over it. So my whole life, I started to kind of try to outrun bad girl Tami. Well, when I was 15 years old, I started to have opportunities to play in these tennis matches, that were out of state, and I was starting to miss some school. So I made the decision to take the GED exam, which is an exam here in America where if you take this GED exam and you pass a subset of 5 tests, it's like a 5-hour test. It's equivalent to having a high school diploma. So right at the end of my just before I was 16, I took this GED exam. And several weeks after my 16th birthday, I received notification that indeed I did pass it. It's a very big reading-based test, and I'm a good reader and a good test taker. So now I have this equivalent to a high school diploma, and I certainly don't want to go to high school, drink beer, and burp, because my body is a shrine, and I'm a straight A student, and I'm going to be a tennis pro. So I decided to go to a local community college with my GED exam, and I tried out for their tennis team, and I was good enough at 16 to be #2 varsity string, and that gave me an opportunity to travel with a college tennis team and to have higher level matches. And then I had to enroll and take 12 units in order to stay on the tennis team. So at 16, I enrolled in college and took 12 units, which was a full load. And again, I did that, I was on the dean's list all 4 semesters. I couldn't get a B. I had to get an A, and I would train and I'd lift weights and I'd run and build endurance and I'd study all night long. And I went to that college for 2 years. During those 2 years, I picked up a drink 2 times. And that's when bad girl Tami showed up, and I picked up a drink. And because I'm an alcoholic that's never mildly intoxicated, I'm always more or less insanely drunk. And because I was under the age of 18, both times I got arrested for public drunkenness. And both times I was put in one of those adolescent lockdown facilities. Now, the big pink elephant in the room is that I'm brought into an adolescent lockdown facility, slurring words, fighting cops, and cussing like a drunken sailor under the influence of alcohol. But within 24 hours of sobering up, the diagnosis changed, because I was telling him I'm afraid of my dad. He touches me in ways I don't want him to. Sometimes it just makes me crazy and I act out. And the diagnosis became emotional and mental disorders, trauma due to childhood, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And they treated the symptoms, which were anxiety because I can't handle life on life's terms. I have these kind of, rage things once a month. And I had a lot of problems sleeping at night, so they gave me something for insomnia. And they said I had clinical depression, so they gave me something for depression. The problem is I'm going to a medical model, not understanding that I don't have a medical problem. I suffer from a spiritual malady. And I sponsor many women over the years, and 90% of them, they have already been to psychiatrists for the way they think, and medical doctors for their symptoms of insomnia or depression to get medications for that. But if they're truly alcoholic, we don't have a medical problem, we have a spiritual problem. My favorite line in the book Alcoholics Anonymous says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out physically and mentally. But most of us will go to get help physically and mentally, not even addressing the spiritual problem. Now, I don't have an opinion about people that have true clinical disorders and need medications, but in my story, I definitely had a spiritual malady, because once I surrendered my right to drink, and more importantly, replaced my drinking with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have not had to see a psychiatrist or take any medications for the 30 years that I've been sober. However, I do sponsor people, and I even have a child that definitely would need some form of medication because they have a clinical diagnosis, which I stay out of that. Anyway, I graduated that 2-year college, which is called the junior college, and I received something called the Chancellor's Award, and that Chancellor's Award afforded me an opportunity where I can go to any one of 5 state universities here in the United States. I could pick any one of the 5 I wanted to go to, and for the next 2 years to finish my bachelor's degree, they were going to pay my tuition, my housing, my textbook, and my living expenses, and all I had to do was play on their tennis team and take a minimum of 12 units. And guess what I did, guys? I quit. Because I intuitively knew at 18 years old, there was no way that I can impose the discipline and the structure that I have to impose upon myself to not act out and just pick up a drink. I was exhausted. I'm 63 years old today, and I can tell you at 18, when I graduated that community college, I was more exhausted and older than I was today, because I was trying to control my behavior and this crazy thing that goes on in my head, which today I understand was alcoholism, by all this external stuff, and it wasn't working. And the faster bad girl Tami was chasing me, the faster I had to run and the higher I had to up the ante. And I intuitively knew at 18 years old, there was no way I could do another 2 years of making straight A's and all the training and all the competition and all the pressure of all that. To hell with it, I quit. And they talk about that in the book. They say right when we're about to grab that brass ring of success, we pull the whole thing down over our head with a senseless series of sprees. It also says that we have special skills, aptitudes, and abilities. We can build a bright outlook for ourselves and even for our loved ones, and then we pull it all down with a senseless series of sprees. And certainly that had been my story my entire life till I came to AA. I was always reinventing myself, and I could build things up, and then boom, I'd bring it all down. So anyway, back in LA, if you had blonde hair, blue eyes, tan skin, a white tooth smile, and a really, really good tennis game, there was a place called Marina Del Rey that was a really kind of nice place for a young girl to hang out. There were a lot of older guys there. They had a lot of money. They were impressed with my tennis game. They invited me to all these fancy tennis clubs. In fact, Hugh Hefner used to have a guy pay me $200 to come to his parties and play tennis. I was fully dressed, but he'd have all these celebrity parties, and he'd hire a few local girls that were good tennis players to come for these celebrity matches. And that's what I did for the next couple of years. Never fulfilled my, finished college, never did anything with the tennis, just like the book says. I built it all up and then pulled it down. Anyway, during this time, I had moved in with that tennis pro, and he was trying to rein me in to try to get my tennis career back, but I was washed out by this age. And when I moved in with him, I was 16 and he was 40, and I was a very precocious, 16-year-old, and sadly to say, he felt it as a temptation, and I ended up becoming his live-in girlfriend. So I'd been with him now I'm like in my early 20s now, so I'd been with him since I was 16. He was paying my rent, my schooling, doing everything he could to try to save my tennis career. And now I'm kind of becoming an albatross on his neck. And I would drink and I would cheat on him and go to these fancy tennis clubs, and he'd throw me out and take me back in, and that craziness that we're in relationships when we're not sober. But I ended up getting a DUI, and it really scared me when I was about 22 years old. And so I did what the book says. I swore off alcohol. For me, it was always with a solemn oath. I'm never going to drink again. And I decided to do the same things and expect different results. So I decided to go back to school. I'm going to clean up my act. And I went to Cal State University, Northridge. And this time I thought maybe the 12 units wasn't enough. I'm going to go for 15. So I enroll in 15 units, and the tennis career is washed up, and I'm not going to do anything if I can't be the best at it. So I decide that I'm going to become a triathlete. And I go to the local health food store, and I buy brown rice and yogurt for Kashi for breakfast, and my body is a shrine, and I'm riding, a bike all these miles, and I'm swimming laps, and I'm lifting weights, and taking these 15 units and trying to control again one more time, clean up all the outsides to temper these crazy, crazy little insides that live inside of me. Anyway, during this time, I met this man that went on to be my husband for 21 years. I call him Dr. Rick. Rick was an OBGYN, and poor old Rick met me in a swearing off period. And I was athletic, energetic, outgoing Tami, and he really had a crush on me. He had actually moved in right next door to my boyfriend and I, where we were living. There was a condominium unit, so there was a wall that separated his unit from ours. And when he moved in, I saw he had a triathlete shirt on, and he's this tall, handsome doctor. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and ding, 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 ding. ding. Forget the fact that I've been living with another guy paying all my bills for the last 7 years. You know how we roll. That's just an incidental. And I start flirting with Dr. Rick, and he joins my local health gym. He had just moved there. He said he just got out of a 10-year marriage, so I knew he was single. And he would go to these medical conventions, and he'd give me the key to his place, and I'd take care of his exotic fish and his plants. And I knew Dr. Rick had a huge crush on me, and I played it for all it was worth. But things started to go bad with Dennis and I, and one day Dennis came home. Now, I'd been on a swearing off period, going to school, doing the control thing. But one day Dennis came home and he had a bottle of tequila, and he and I got in an argument. And I remember I started to do shooters of tequila. I call it tequila if you're an alcoholic of my type. And I went into a blackout, and my boyfriend and I got into one of those knockdown, drag-out fights, physical fights that we can get into when we're drunk, usually precipitated by my mouth just going off. And Dr. Rick heard the fight next door, and it was getting so loud and violent that he called the police. He later said he was surprised that he gave the police the address of our condominium complex, but he never gave them the unit number. They already knew where to go because they'd been there before. So the police show up, and I'm sitting drunk on the couch, and Dr. Rick is standing with the police, and my boyfriend's at the door, and he eventually got rid of the police, and he got rid of Dr. Rick. And then my boyfriend and I went upstairs and did one of those all-night, passionate makeups, the way we do after we just beat the crap out of each other, and the police show up, and then it's, oh, baby, you're my soulmate. I love you. Don't ever leave me, because we're so whack, when we're not sober. But I woke up the next morning, and I thought nothing to take a little liquid makeup, cover the black eyes, the bruises, the choke marks from the night before, and go off to Cal State University Northridge like there was nothing wrong with this picture. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm in the subterranean parking of that condominium complex, and I'm walking toward the elevator, and my back is rigid, my jaw hurts, I'm restless, I'm irritable, I'm discontented, and I'm tightly wound, and I'm walking toward the elevator. Now, I haven't slept the night before because we spent all night making up after a physical fight. I'd been drinking the night before, so I'm hungover. We beat the crap out of each other, so my body physically hurts. And I've been sitting in classes all day listening to lectures, and everything hurt. And as I'm walking toward the elevator, all of a sudden this thought occurred to me. A huge bottle of vodka is in the kitchen. Liquid relief is just moments away. Now, I didn't see the vodka. I haven't smelled the vodka. But just thinking about a clear liquid that looks no more or less innocuous than water, a glass of water, my jaw loosened up, my back relaxed. I got a little hop in my step. And if you identify with that, you're probably an alcoholic, because clear liquids do not have a voice that tells us everything's going to be okay even before we drink it. So I get into the elevator, and liquid reliefs are coming, and I go to push button number 3, and right as I do, Dr. Rick appears at the doors of the elevator. And I try to push the closed door button, and his hand wedges between those doors, and now I'm stuck in an elevator with the guy that called the police on me the night before. And prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and having a good sponsor like Clancy, I used to use a tremendous amount of filthy language and a tremendous amount of sexual attire and inappropriate sexual humor to always keep people like a little bit of a distance from me, so that I could never just have an intimate conversation, especially with men. So Dr. Rick's in the elevator, and he says, Tami, you and I need to talk about what happened last night. So I pull out the cussing, brash street kid, and I'm like, you effing know what went down last night. You're the one that called the effing cops on me, and I don't want to effing talk about it. And instead of him doing the usual, what men used to do, like, whoa, 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 okay, never mind, and back off, he looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder. And that really disarmed me. So then I went into my next bag of tricks, and I took his silk fastenal tie, and I pulled his neck right into my nose, and I took a big sniff, and I said, my gosh, Dr. Rick, you just always smell so delicious. And he didn't bite the bait, because he took his other hand and he put it on my other shoulder. And he looked at me and into my eyes with his beautiful, brown eyes of his. And he said, Tami, I have really come to care for you. And you're such an enterprising, talented, beautiful young woman. But I can see there's something really wrong. And I want to help you, but I don't know what's wrong with you. And man, that's the worst thing you can hear if you're an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism and you don't know it. Because literally at this point, I think I'm crazy. In fact, I know I'm crazy. And my goal now at 23 years old is that I have to make sure you don't know how scared I am about how crazy I really am. And my whole life has become a charade and a facade. And I am constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself about the role that alcohol plays in my life and the role I play in the lives of others. And now another person has just hit me with the truth that I cannot accept myself. And the book tells us that, in many, many places, that we must be rigorously honest with ourselves and another human being if we're going to make this thing. But for whatever reason, and today I know it was God's grace, I broke down and I cried for the first time like the broken 22-year-old little girl that I was. No more sexual provocative Tami. No more cuss tough, I can handle life Tami. I broke down and I sobbed like a broken little child. And I went to my condominium unit and he held me. And to this day, I still believe it was probably one of the most intimate moments I've ever shared with a man because he just held me and I felt safe. I went next door to my condominium unit after, and I never did take that drink of vodka. It's the first time I had slept in a couple of weeks without having to drink myself to sleep. And I went to sleep, just that relief of being able to cry and be real for just a couple of minutes in 22 years. But I woke up the next morning and I felt the fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that fear that comes in 100 different forms because another human being saw the broken truth about me. I couldn't control the narrative. And I am constitutionally incapable of being able to handle the truth about myself. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And I got that glass of vodka that morning and I poured that glass of vodka. Now, every alcoholic has an idea. It's never a good idea when we're drinking, and that's why we have to be sponsored. But my idea that morning was that things weren't going really well with my boyfriend. We were circling the drain. I knew Dr. Rick had a huge crush on me. I had the key to his condominium unit. And my plan that morning was I was going to move everything out of my unit with my boyfriend that I'd lived with now for 7 years. I was going to move it into Dr. Rick's. I was going to get him between the sheets. And I was going to replace the image that I saw of myself reflected in his eyes the night before of pity and replace it with Tami, the sexual goddess. So I spent that morning drunk moving, and I literally did move everything out of one unit and into the other. And my boyfriend came home that afternoon, and there I weren't. Everything was vacant. I was all moved out. Dr. Rick came home that afternoon, and there I was, all moved on in with dinner on the table. And the sad thing is Dr. Rick not only let me stay, but 3 weeks later, he walked me down the aisle, and he said, I do. And his life was not the same for many, many years. And that was the day he said I do was the day he qualified for Al-Anon. I'm an member of Alcoholics Anonymous that is deeply indebted to Al-Anon. My ex-husband now has been in Al-Anon for 31 years. And Al-Anon took away my greatest enabler and gave me a husband. But God, I hated Al-Anon while I was drinking. So that marriage produced 2 children, and today I have a daughter, Chelsea, that's 36, and my son, Alex, is 35. Through the grace of God, in both those pregnancies, I was so physically sick. I didn't puke like the first trimester. I threw up the entire 9 months of my pregnancy with my daughter. 6 weeks after I gave birth to my daughter, I found out I was pregnant again, this time with my son. Dr. Rick hates me sharing that. He's an OBGYN. You're supposed to wait like 12 weeks between babies. Anyway, I got pregnant again. And I went another 9 months. I had a condition called hyperemesis where I couldn't keep food down or liquids my entire pregnancy. And so I went 2 years without picking up a drink. But I remember it like yesterday. I woke up one morning. I'm now in a 5-bedroom, 4-bath house with a pool, 2 cars in the garage, 4 cars in the garage paid for. He was a big auto person. Dr. Rick, he collected antique cars. I don't work. I don't go to school. I'm married to a surgeon that makes a boatload of money. I have a 1-year-old girl and a brand new baby boy. And I was so painfully aware I am a completely crippled human being living in this big adult world. And I felt the fear they talk about in that book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And after 2 years and 3 months of not picking up a drink, I went down to the liquor store and I bought a bottle of vodka and I took a drink just to take the edge off because I had these little babies at home. Within a year, I became a round-the-clock drinker. If you do not believe that this illness progresses even when you're not drinking, I am proof in the pudding that it does because I was never a daily drinker, and literally I became a daily drunk. Things got dangerous. Rick even had to hire a full-time housekeeper to stay home and take care of the kids because he's coming home and finding me drunk. So now I don't work. I don't go to school. I'm not even responsible for my kids. And and I have a bunch of money, and that's suicide if you're an alcoholic of my type. Things were starting to get out of control. And one day Rick came home from his Al-Anon meeting and he said, Tammy, you can go to a hell in a handbasket, but you're not going to take the kids and I with you anymore. And I knew that Al-Anon was giving him the backbone that he needed to stand up against my drinking. I started to feel like I was losing control everywhere. So I, again, went to the liquor store, bought a bottle of vodka. I plugged my nose and downed it as quickly as I could because now I'm at the point of my drinking where I can't even smell alcohol. I'll start to throw up before I can keep it down long enough to heat up my chest and give me that ease and that comfort. So I'm drinking like this, downing, just praying it'll stay down. So I'm drinking solely for the effect. Anyway, I got drunk behind the wheel of the car. I saw a call box on the freeway. I thought it was a telephone booth. I plowed my car into the call box, and 30 days later, I'm standing in front of a woman judge, and now I got my second felony DUI. And note to self, if you hit a call box, that's federal property. I did not know that. And so the case was the United States government against Tami for hitting a call box. And I stand in front of a woman judge 30 days later, and she said, Tami, your rich doctor surgeon husband isn't going to get you out of this one. You're going to do some jail time. However, I'm going to waive 30 days of your jail time sentencing by first putting you in a lockdown facility for alcoholism. So I go into this lockdown facility, and I told those doctors what I'd been telling them since I was 15 years old and first started appearing in those adolescent facilities. Look, at first I drank to feel good, and then I drank to feel normal, and now I drink not to feel. And those doctors told me what they had been telling me since I was 15 years old. Tami, you are clinically depressed as a result of your childhood. You're using alcohol to self-medicate, but none of this is your fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, old-timers like Clancy had a new name for the effect that alcohol appeared to have on me, as described word for word in the doctor's opinion of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. They suggested that I have a physical allergy to alcohol coupled by the mental obsession, and that I may be an alcoholic. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors that I would wake up, I'd see broken glass, broken children, a broken husband, a broken home. I'd go upstairs, turn the heating blanket up to mom, suck my thumb, and think of ways to kill myself. And I did have a feeble attempt at suicide one time when my little daughter was home and she had to call a neighbor. And in that lockdown facility, they said that I'm clinically depressed from my childhood. The best hope for me is medical management through the right medications for anxiety, depression, and insomnia, which, by the way, are symptoms of acute alcoholism, but that none of these behaviors were my fault, that I was a victim and needed help. Later, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, Clancy had a new name for a mother that was willing to take her life in front of her little child without giving a crap how it would affect that kid. He called it alcoholism, selfishness, self-centeredness. The world revolved around Tami's childhood pain. Forget I got two little kids in their childhood. It's always about me. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors that in my swearing off periods, I'd go down to the local gym, work out with all you men, of course, and then I'd take my husband's credit card and buy drinks on his dime, buy lunch for everybody, always playing the big shot, taking credit for money I didn't even earn. And in that lockdown facility, they told me taking my husband's credit card to buy affection and acceptance from men was really my way indirectly of buying the love I'd been so poorly robbed of in my childhood from my father, but none of those actions were my fault. Later, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, the old timers had a new name for that behavior too. They called it stealing. And not only did I steal my husband's credit card and play big shot on his dime with money I didn't even earn, but I used to go to those daytime motels with some of the men that I played racquetball with at that gym. And let's just say I did what drunken alcoholic women do in those daytime motels, while my husband's working his butt off around the clock to support us, and my two little kids are going to preschool just trying to get through their little day. And in that lockdown facility, they told me that my dad gave me a script when I was a kid, that my only worth was my sexuality, and all I was doing in those hotel rooms was acting out a script I'd been so poorly given in my childhood. But none of that behavior in those hotel rooms were my fault. And for a buck in a basket in AA, the old timers had a name for that too. They called it cheating. See, by the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd had years of therapy, and now I'm in this fancy lockdown facility to find out that living inside of me is this hurt, wounded inner child due to my childhood. And for a buck in a basket, the old timer said, no, kid, you're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a thief, and you're probably just an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism. And oh, I needed it to be so much more. So the condition of my getting out of this lockdown facility is they want me to start attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. It was a rule, a sentencing of the court. And so I come to meetings late, I leave meetings early, I wear low-cut tops and little Daisy Duke shorts, and I spend most of my time flirting with you men, and I took 5 of those 30-day chips. I'll never forget my last run because I'd gone to an AA meeting, and I came home, and my husband confronted me about the way I was dressing and acting, and we got in a fight, and I picked up another drink, and I went missing for 3 days. To this day, I have no recollection of what happened in those 3 days or where I was. But when I finally did resurface, I was served a restraining order. My mom, my sister, and my husband had gone down to local family court, and the family court awarded my husband and my mom temporary custody of my 2 children. And I had a restraining order that said that I could not come within 100 feet of my home, of my husband's medical practice, of my children, of their school, or of their after-school daycare, and I had to leave. And I remember calling my ex-husband and saying, where am I going to go? And he goes, I don't know, Tammy, but you need to go. And he said, and when you find a place to live, I will send you every month. But for God's sakes, woman, just leave me and the children alone. I finally found a place that day, and I called him and asked him if I could just come and pick up a few things. And he said I could, and I had to meet him at a certain time. And as I walked up the stairs of that home that I had brought those 2 babies home from, just several years earlier, and I saw all the pictures on the wall in our decorated home, and I literally was a walking dead person. I remember my body moving up the stairs, and I remember this low ringing in my ears, but I was vacant, like void of any emotion. And I went in my bedroom, and I threw some sweats and some T-shirts in a gym bag, and I had no fight left. I didn't want to fight with my husband. I couldn't even cry. I was literally dead, which is a pretty good place to be spiritually dead when you walk into the doors of AA. I didn't have any more good ideas. I had no more plans. I had no fight left. Alcohol won. And I threw some sweats and some T-shirts in this gym bag, and my husband was standing out in the hallway. And as I walked out to the hall, I just said to him, Rick, can I say goodbye to the kids before I leave? And he said, Tammy, we haven't known whether you were dead or alive for the last 3 days. Your kids have been through hell and back. They are asleep in their rooms. I will let you look in on them, and later down the road, maybe the courts will allow you some visitation rights, but you can look in on them. But for once in your life, Tammy, don't wake up your children. And that was on April 23rd, 1993. And I took the handle of my little son Alex's bedroom door. And as I opened the door, the hall light went right down onto my little son sleeping in his bunk bed. And I'm always so ashamed to share this, but my son was 5. And as I looked at my son that evening, I saw my little boy for the first time the way a mother's supposed to see a child. He looked so beautiful. He looked so little. He looked so alive. And I was mesmerized, and he looked just like his dad. And as I walked toward him, I'd been drinking for 3 days. I reeked of alcohol, and I just walked toward him, and I sat on his bed, and he opened up his eyes, and he took my hand, and he started to rub my hand. And my little boy said to me, Mommy, when are you going to come home and not go away anymore and just be with us? And in that instant, I became willing to do whatever it took. I never wanted to drink alcohol again. And I knew it like I'm sitting here this morning. It was not my dad. It was not the divorce. It was not the abuse. Everything that was going on in my life and hurting the people that I loved the most was over a clear liquid called vodka. There is no shame in being an alcoholic. The shame, none of us want this. The shame is that there was a place to go that I could have got help to quit hurting these people. And I did the 3 Ds. I kept defending, deflecting, and denying so that I didn't have to do the work. And for the first time, alcohol did what I believe it needs to do. That's why we're so selfish and self-centered. Alcohol for the first time hurt me. My kids were already hurt. My husband was hurt, but we're so selfish and we're so self-centered. You know when we surrender drinking? when it hurts us. And I felt this pain in my chest for this little kid. And I knew it. And I said a prayer that I believe every alcoholic needs to say. And I just said, God, if you're there, please help me. And I went down to my home group that night. And here I am, a surgeon's wife with a 5-bedroom house. And they used to have this old beat up van in the back of my home group where people could stay coming off a wet drunk. And I slept in that back van that night because I had nowhere to go. But I never felt more at peace than I did that night, because I wasn't going to quit drinking one more time. I was finished, and I knew it in my soul, and I knew that I was going to do whatever it took. And somehow in those 5 months that I came flitting in and out of AA with my low-cut tops and my high-cut shorts, you guys had carried the message to me of hope. And I went in the next morning and I found this mean old timer, Cowboy Nick, that used to tell the guys he sponsored, stay the hell away from that blonde girl, Tami. She's bad news. And I told him, Nick, I just lost my kids, my husband, and my house. And I said, I will do anything if you can help me stop drinking. And that is musical words to our old timers. You know, if you want money, or I want a place to stay, or I want this, or I want that, you know, old timers aren't going to go out of their way to help you, man. But if you go in and say, I want to quit drinking, I watched his eyes sparkle a little, and he put his hand out and he said, kid, why don't you put your hand in mine and let us help you? And I grabbed his hand, and I have not had a drink since. Look, my time is up, but I want to say that for a little, in sobriety, I learned, you know, how to clean up my filthy language. I learned how to dress becomingly like a lady instead of a 2-bit whore. And the old timers weren't nice to me. Clancy used to say, do you eat with that filthy mouth? And I'd say, yeah. He goes, clean up the cussing. I don't want to hear it. It's not ladylike. Why don't you dress like a mother instead of a whore? And they were hard on me, but they cared more about my life than they did about my feelings. And I am deeply indebted to the old timers that really kicked my butt into sobriety. I learned how to go back to school in Alcoholics Anonymous and finish my degree. I remember when I had a year sober saying, now that I'm sober, I'm going back to school and getting my bachelor's degree. And I just signed up for 15 units. And they're like, good idiot, now go drop 11 of them. And they made me get my degree 4 or 6 units at a time. They said, you know what, you will never call us up and tell us that your busy life now in sobriety is too busy for you to come to meetings. And I have never missed meetings of AA because of school or finals, because they made me take, you know, the right amount. At 12 years of sobriety, my husband quit going to Al-Anon. He made a fatal Al-Anon mistake that my wife is sober. My wife contributes to the family income, yada, yada, yada. Oh, okay, thanks, Glenn. I just got your message. He said I can go, keep going. Anyway, I'm winding up. Anyway, and he came home one day and he said, Tami, I met another woman. She's younger than you. She's prettier than you. And she's more fun than you. And I thought I was going to die at 12 years sober. And he later, he left me for that woman. And she later turned out to be a worse alcoholic than me, if you can believe it. But she was vindictive and took him for every penny. And I don't share my husband's story because it's his, but he had also been married to an alcoholic woman before me. And it turns out, he said, he went back to Al-Anon with the willingness of the dying, and they told him, look, you know, you're attracted to women who have an affinity for alcohol, and you're addicted to their alcoholism. And so he works a good Al-Anon program today. Rick got, after our divorce, my current husband, Patrick, is a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He has 42 years of sobriety himself. And I was so broken walking through that divorce, and he just would meet me for breakfast and make sure I went to meetings. And he always watched out for the girls I sponsored. And over time, we became a boy meets girl on AA campus. My daughter graduated college with honors. She is not one of us. My beautiful son, Alex, turned out to be one of us. And I went through hell with him from 15 until 25. But today he is an 8-year sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. His drug addiction brought me to my knees. It was really just years and years of hell, but I just kept working a program, and those old timers were right by my side, and it involved homelessness and a couple of jail stints. And during that time, this girl shows up at my door and she says, I'm pregnant with your son's baby. And I thought, like, it ain't hell. It's not hot. I'm not here. And he was in jail for, you know, drunk driving at the time. And they swabbed him, and it turned out that it was his kid. And sadly to say, she wasn't mentally well and went homeless with the baby and with police and the courts and all that. My husband, myself, and my son, with 8 years sobriety now, at the time he wasn't sober, have custody of this beautiful little 8-year-old. When my mom was sick and going through hospice, Patrick and I were able to move her in with us, and we took care of her until the good Lord called her home. And in 2013, my ex-husband was a Vietnam War vet. He was an air flight surgeon in the Vietnam War, and they sprayed his medical base with that Agent Orange, and he got into full-blood septicemia. And they finally called us, and we went down, and he was not viable with life. They had him on life support machines just long enough so me and the kids could go and the kids could say their goodbyes. And my kids had to say goodbye to their dad. And I remember calling Clancy and just saying, it shouldn't be him. He was a better person than me. And Clancy said, Tammy, you put on your big gold panties. That is the kid's father. And you walked them in one by one. And I did. And they said goodbye to their dad. And then it was my turn. And I had to be in a full hazmat suit because he was septic, but he was in a coma. And I just went to his ear and I just said, Ricky, I said, as long as I'm on God's green earth, I will make sure that no harm comes to your children, and I'll be here for them. And I said, but buddy, if you got any kind of fight left in you, you give it your all, and I will be there every step of the way. And everyone had gone, and the doctors told us to tell him, to give him permission to let go. Even my husband, Patrick, went in and he said, Rick, I'll take care of your kids. I know you don't want to live on tubes and machines. You go on home for a life well lived, buddy, and rest in peace. And apparently they'd all gone in, and I was the last one. And I just told him, like, hey, you want to go and rest peacefully, you go, buddy. But if you want to fight, you give it your all. Anyway, Rick didn't die that night. He didn't die for the next week. 15 days later, they pulled him off life support, and he started to breathe on his own. 5 months later, he was finally viable, where he didn't have to stay in intensive care in a tertiary care hospital anymore. They were able to put him in a skilled nursing facility, but he could barely walk or talk. And they said that that was about the best hope for him. But what he did tell me was that everyone kept telling him to let go. And he said, when he heard my voice, he said, it's like everyone was telling me to let go, like I was dying. And he said, it really scared me. And then when you told me to fight, he said, like, I heard you, Tammy. So if anyone's ever in a coma, believe me, they can hear you. Anyway, to make a long story short, we brought Rick home instead of putting him in a skilled nursing facility. And he lived with us for 6 years. And through the love of a good ex-wife, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, and definitely my current husband's good cooking, Rick did fully recover, and he's back practicing medicine again. And that's all through the grace of God. Look, for a little girl who couldn't even take care of herself, let alone her own kids, I've been able to be there for my own children. I was able to be there for my mom when she needed us. I was able to be there for my ex-husband. I'm able to take care of my current husband now, battling stage 4 throat cancer. And I've been able to raise a little grandchild, the last 8 years. And that's all through the grace of God in AA. If you don't like the script in your life, you get to rewrite it. And left to my own devices, I puked in a porcelain bowl and hurt everybody near me. I thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. I thank each and every one of you in Alcoholics Anonymous for God. And I thank you for caring more about my life than my feelings and kicking my butt into sobriety. Thanks so much for listening.